I walked into my apartment at 6:15 on a Tuesday evening, still wearing my work badge clipped to my blazer, when I heard the unmistakable sound of a child laughing coming from my bedroom. Not the hallway, not the living room. My bedroom, the one with the lock I'd installed last month after my laptop went missing from my desk. My heart did this strange, sickening flip. I stood frozen in the doorway of my own place, my keys still in my hand, listening to what sounded like my brother's voice, saying something about cartoons and bedtime. That moment, tackling exact second when reality fractures and you realize something is catastrophically, irreversibly wrong. I couldn't move. I couldn't process it. I just stood there like an idiot, my mind refusing to connect the dots that were screaming to be connected. My name is Ashley. I'm 32 years old. I work in marketing at a tech firm downtown, and I owned that apartment outright. No mortgage, no landlord. Just me and my carefully curated life that I'd spent the last 5 years building, piece by piece. 3 months earlier, everything had felt perfect. I'd closed on the purchase of the one-bedroom apartment in the Riverside district of Portland on a bright April morning, and I remember standing in the empty space, slowly turning in a circle, unable to believe it was actually mine. The seller's agent had done a final walkthrough while I stood in the kitchen. Granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, big windows that caught the afternoon light. I'd taken a photo of myself standing in front of the window and sent it to my mom with the caption, "Home." One word. That's all it needed. My job had been stable. I'd worked my way up from junior coordinator to senior marketing manager at Morrison Digital Solutions, a firm with about 80 employees that specialized in B2B campaigns. My boss, Derek, had given me a $5,000 raise the previous December. My credit score was 742. I had $17,000 in my emergency fund. I went to Pilates on Mondays and Thursdays. I meal prepped on Sundays. I had a therapist named Dr. Reeves who I saw every other week. My life was the kind of life that people on Instagram aspire to. Not because it was glamorous, but because it was organized, intentional, and entirely under my control. My brother Michael is 4 years younger than me. He'd always been the chaotic one, the one who dropped out of Portland State after 2 years to pursue music production, who moved in and out of his parents' house 5 times between ages 22 and 28, who had a tendency to show up at family dinners with a new girlfriend and announce that he was moving to Denver or Portland or Seattle, depending on where that girlfriend happened to be from. My parents, Carol and Jim, had learned to love this about him. I'd learned to keep my distance. When Michael had called me in early February, his voice sounded different, softer somehow. He told me he'd met someone. Her name was Jennifer. She had a son from a previous relationship, Brandon, who was 6 years old. Michael said he loved her. He said he was tired of the chaos. He said he wanted to build something real. I remember sitting at my desk during lunch, listening to him talk about Jennifer's laugh and Brandon's obsession with video games, and thinking that maybe my brother had finally grown up. "That's great, Michael," I'd said, and I meant it. I was genuinely happy for him. He'd asked if we could get dinner sometime, maybe all of us together. I'd said yes. I'd suggested a place called the Daily Catch, which had incredible seafood and a kids' menu that Brandon might like. We'd made plans for a Friday night at 7 o'clock. That dinner never happened, because Jennifer had gotten evicted from her apartment building on the Wednesday before it was scheduled. Mold in the walls, apparently. The landlord had given everyone in the building 30 days' notice, but Jennifer had moved out immediately, rather than stay in a place she deemed unsafe for her son. She'd put her things in storage. She'd been staying with Michael at his place, but Michael's apartment was a studio, barely 300 square feet, and neither of them wanted Brandon sleeping on a couch. Michael had called me on Thursday morning. "Ash, I have a huge favor to ask," he'd said. His voice had that quality that I'd learned to recognize over the years, the tone he used when he wanted something. I'd known exactly what he was going to say before he said it. I could feel it coming like a storm system rolling in across the coast. We need somewhere to stay, just for a few weeks, until Jennifer can figure out something more permanent. I know it's a lot to ask, but your place is empty most of the time, and Brandon really needs a proper bed, and Michael, no, I'd said. No, absolutely not. You haven't even heard me out. I don't need to. My apartment is my space. I just moved in. Exactly, you just moved in. There's room. That's not the point. The point is that I own a home now, and I get to decide who lives in it and who doesn't. Those are my boundaries. There was a pause. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. So that's it? He'd asked. We're family, and you won't even let us stay for a few weeks? There are hotels, Michael. There are rental agencies. There are your parents. Mom and Dad are in Arizona for the winter. Then wait until they get back. I'd hung up the call feeling terrible, but resolute. I'd made my position clear. Michael knew where I stood. Case closed. Except, case was not closed. About 2 weeks later, my mom had called me. She'd been in Arizona with my dad for their annual 3-month escape from the Portland rain. She'd called to say that Michael had been talking to her about his housing situation, and that maybe, just maybe, I could find it in my heart to be a little more flexible. That family was important. That Jennifer and Brandon didn't have anywhere else to go. Mom, I love you, I'd said carefully. But this isn't your decision to make. It's mine. She'd sighed that sigh, the one that made me feel like I was being unreasonable, even when I knew I wasn't. He's your brother, she'd said simply. That was where things had stood for the past month. Radio silence from Michael. A few awkward texts from my mom asking how my new place was settling. And then, nothing. I'd convinced myself that he'd found somewhere else, that Jennifer had worked something out, that the whole situation had resolved itself without me having to be the bad guy in the family narrative. I was so very, very wrong. Standing in my doorway that Tuesday evening, listening to my brother's voice echoing from my bedroom, I felt something shift inside my chest. It wasn't anger yet. It was something closer to vertigo, the sensation of falling without knowing where the ground was. Hello? I called out, my voice sounding strange and small. The talking stopped immediately. Michael appeared in the bedroom doorway a moment later, and when he saw me, his face went through this rapid sequence of expressions: surprise, guilt, and then something that looked almost like defiance. He was wearing jeans and a gray t-shirt that I recognized as his. Behind him, I could see my bed. The one I'd bought from West Elm. The one I'd taken 3 hours choosing because I wanted the thread count to be exactly right. Ashley, he said, stepping out into the hallway and pulling the bedroom door shut behind him. You're home early. Home early. As if I was a guest in my own apartment. As if he had any right whatsoever to be making observations about when I came and went from the place I owned. What are you doing here? I asked. And even as I asked it, I already knew the answer. We're staying here for a few weeks, Michael said, and his voice had that calm, almost rehearsed quality that told me he'd been preparing for this conversation. Jennifer lost her apartment. Brandon needs stability. We didn't have anywhere else to go. You didn't have anywhere else to go, so you just moved in? Without asking me? Without even a text message? I tried to ask. You said no. Exactly. I said no. And then you decided my answer didn't matter? Michael's jaw tightened. Your answer was selfish, Ashley. The word hit like a slap. I felt my face flush hot and red. Selfish. Let me explain something to you, Michael. This is my apartment. I paid for it. I own it. And you broke into it and moved your entire family in without my permission. That's not selfish on my part. That's trespassing on yours. I didn't break in. I used the spare key you gave me for emergencies. Emergencies. A housing shortage is not an emergency. A mold problem that happened 2 weeks ago is not an emergency. Brandon is 6 years old, Ashley. He's sleeping in my bed right now because his mother lost her home. I know you don't care about that, but some of us actually do. I felt something crack open inside my chest. Not sympathy, but something worse. Rage. Pure, white-hot rage that made my hands shake. "Where is Jennifer?" I asked. "She's out, getting groceries. She wanted to—" "Get out," I said quietly. "All of you. Tonight." "Ashley, deflect, Michael. I don't care where you go. A hotel, your parents' house, a shelter. I don't care. But you are not staying in my apartment." He stared at me for a long moment, and I watched his face shift from defensive to something harder. "You know what? Fine, we'll leave. But don't expect me to forgive you for this. Don't expect any of us to." He turned and went back into my bedroom, closing the door behind him with a soft click that somehow felt worse than a slam. I stood in my hallway, my heart pounding so hard I thought my ribs might crack. My hands were shaking. I pulled out my phone and called my mom. It went to voicemail. She was still in Arizona with limited cell service. I hung up without leaving a message. I called my therapist. Dr. Reeves had an emergency line for situations like this, though I wasn't sure this technically qualified. A woman answered and told me Dr. Reeves had office hours tomorrow at 2 o'clock. I booked it. Then I sat down on my couch, the couch I'd bought from Article, the one that had cost me almost $3,000 and that I'd chosen specifically for this space. And I cried. Not because I was sad, but because I was furious and betrayed and violated, and I didn't know how to make Michael understand that without sounding like the villain in my own story. 20 minutes later, Jennifer emerged from my bedroom. She was probably in her late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a messy bun and the kind of tired eyes that come from being a single mother. She looked at me with something like fear. "Ashley," she said, "I'm really sorry. Michael said you wouldn't mind. He said you had space and that you wouldn't use the second bedroom anyway." "He lied," I said flatly. "Pack your things. You're leaving." "Tonight? Brandon is asleep. He has school tomorrow." "Tonight," I repeated. "I don't care about the logistics. That's not my problem." She flinched like I'd hit her. "I understand you're upset, but we don't have anywhere to go. Michael said—" "I don't care what Michael said. He doesn't own this apartment. I do, and I want you out." She went very pale. "We have nowhere. Do you understand that? We have absolutely nowhere." I understood it. I did. But understanding it and being okay with it were two completely different things. This woman had allowed my brother to violate my home, my space, my explicit boundary. She'd slept in my bed. She'd used my shower. She'd let her son play in my apartment like it belonged to them. "Call a hotel," I said, "or call Michael's parents, or figure it out, but not here." Michael came out of the bedroom then, carrying a suitcase. He didn't look at me. He just started throwing things into a duffel bag. Clothes, toys, a stuffed animal that must have been Brandon's. Jennifer went back into the bedroom and gently woke their son, who stumbled out half asleep, confused and crying. "Why are we leaving?" Brandon asked, his voice small and scared. "Because your Aunt Ashley doesn't want us here," Michael said, and I heard the bitterness in every syllable. "That's not fair," I said. "Don't do that. Don't make this my fault when you're the one who— Who what? Who tried to help? Who tried to find a solution? You're right. That's totally on me." They left 40 minutes later, around 8 o'clock. Michael carried Brandon, who was crying and asking why I didn't like them. Jennifer had tears streaming down her face. They had 2 suitcases and a duffel bag and nowhere to go at 8 o'clock on the Thursday night in Portland. I watched them leave from my window, and I felt like I was going to throw up. That night, I walked through my apartment checking everything. My bed had an indent from where Michael had been lying with Brandon. There were toys scattered in my living room. The kitchen smelled like cooking. They'd used my stove, my pans, my food. I found Brandon's toothbrush in my bathroom, left behind in the rush to leave. I called my work the next morning and said I wasn't feeling well. I stayed home, cleaned every surface with bleach, and tried to stop shaking. By noon, my mom had called me back. She'd gotten my missed call and was returning it from a landline somewhere in Sedona. "What's going on?" she asked. "Are you okay?" I told her everything. About Michael showing up, about Jennifer and Brandon, about throwing them out. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Ashley," my mom said finally, "that was really harsh." "Mom, he broke into my apartment. He moved his entire family into my home without asking. He violated every boundary I set." "I know, honey, and he shouldn't have done that. But they don't have anywhere to go. Michael called us this morning from a motel out in Gresham. He's terrified. Jennifer is talking about putting Brandon in the school district there, which means she's not looking for permanent housing. She's just accepting this. That's not my problem." "Isn't it?" my mom asked quietly. "He's your brother. Brandon is your nephew. Jennifer is about to become your sister-in-law. Don't you care about any of that?" I cared. God, I cared so much that it hurt. But I cared about my own life more, and I hated myself for that. "I need to think," I said, and I hung up the phone. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my bed, my own pristine bed that no longer felt like mine, and I thought about Brandon crying. I thought about Jennifer's face when I told her to leave. I thought about Michael's voice saying that I was selfish. The next morning, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Is this Ashley Chen?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes?" "This is Detective Sarah Morrison with the Portland Police Department. I'm calling because your brother, Michael Chen, filed a report yesterday. He's claiming that you're preventing him from accessing his belongings that he left in your apartment. He's also claiming that you threw his family out onto the street without cause and that you've been harassing him via text message. Is that accurate?" My stomach dropped. "He filed a police report?" "I'm asking you to confirm whether the allegations are true." "I own the apartment. He didn't have permission to be there. He moved in without asking, and when I found out, I told him to leave. I didn't throw anyone out onto the street. I gave them time to pack." "Do you have written documentation of his permission to live there?" "No, because I didn't give him permission." "Okay, here's the situation, Miss Chen. Your brother is claiming that he had an oral agreement with you to stay in the apartment for a few weeks. If that's true, then technically, you may need to provide proper notice and follow eviction procedures, even for family members. If it's false, then you're correct that you had the right to ask him to leave. Do you have any text messages or emails confirming that you explicitly denied his request to stay?" I pulled up my text history with Michael. I have texts from February, where he asked and I said no. "Can you send those to me?" I did. Detective Morrison said she'd review them and get back to me. She also said that Michael was requesting access to his belongings from the apartment. "Is that something you'd be willing to facilitate?" she asked. "I don't know what belongings he's talking about. He doesn't live here. He never lived here. He's claiming that he has personal items in the second bedroom. My second bedroom. The one I used as an office. The one that was completely empty except for my desk and a bookshelf. There's nothing of his in my apartment," I said firmly. Detective Morrison said she'd be in touch and hung up. I immediately called my landlord. No, wait. I owned the apartment. I didn't have a landlord. I called a lawyer instead. Her name was Patricia Summers, and she specialized in family law and property disputes. I found her through the Oregon State Bar and booked an emergency consultation for that afternoon. Patricia's office was in downtown Portland, in a building with high ceilings and a view of the Willamette River. She was a woman in her 60s with gray hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She listened to my entire story without interrupting, and then she leaned back in her chair. "The good news," she said, "is that you have documented proof that you denied his request to stay in February. That text message conversation is going to be very helpful." The bad news is that Oregon has specific tenant laws, and even family members can establish residency relatively quickly. If he can prove that he was living there with your knowledge, even if you later revoked that permission, you may technically need to provide formal notice. But I didn't give him permission. Right, but he's claiming you did. It becomes a he said, she said situation. However, she tapped her pen against her desk, if we can establish that he was never actually living there, if you have evidence that his residency was brief and that you immediately revoked permission, we can potentially argue that he was a guest, not a tenant, and therefore you had the right to ask him to leave. He was there for 2 weeks, I said, maybe 3. Do you have any documentation of that? Neighbors who can testify? Photos from your apartment during that time that show his belongings? I thought about it. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, had seen Michael leaving with suitcases. There were photos on my phone from the day I came home and found them. I had the police report from Detective Morrison. I can probably get witnesses, I said. Good. Here's what I recommend. First, don't communicate with Michael directly. Any communication goes through me now. Second, document everything. Keep records of this police report, the call with the detective, everything. Third, if he tries to come back to the apartment, don't let him in. Call the police if he tries to force entry. And fourth, I'm going to send him a formal letter stating that he was a guest in your property and that his stay has been terminated. I'll also state that any further contact with you regarding this matter must go through me. The letter cost me $250. Patricia had it drawn up and sent via certified mail within 2 hours. Michael didn't respond. But 2 days later, I got another call from Detective Morrison. Miss Chen, I've reviewed the documentation you provided, and I think you have a solid case. Your brother's claim doesn't hold up. The text messages clearly show that you denied his request, and there's no evidence of a subsequent agreement. However, he's now claiming that you're harassing him by having your lawyer contact him. He wants a restraining order. A restraining order? For what? I haven't done anything. I know. That's why I'm calling. I wanted to give you a heads up before anything gets filed. Do you think he'll actually pursue it? I didn't know. Michael was angry enough to do it. Angry enough to make my life as difficult as possible out of spite. I don't know, I said honestly. Well, if he does file, you'll be notified. In the meantime, I'd recommend that you continue to document everything and avoid any contact with him. He did file. 2 weeks later, I received a notice that Michael had filed for a restraining order, claiming that I'd verbally abused him, thrown his family out of my home, and was now using legal intimidation to keep him from contacting me. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. I was furious. I was also terrified. A restraining order felt permanent, like I'd be branded as some kind of abuser. I called Patricia and told her to prepare for the hearing. We'll win this, she said, but it's going to be emotional. You need to be prepared for him to paint you as the villain. The hearing took place in a courtroom in the Multnomah County Courthouse on a gray afternoon in June. Michael was there with a woman I didn't recognize, probably a lawyer he'd hired. I was there with Patricia. Judge Eleanor Hayes presided, and she looked about as interested in this case as I felt. Michael spoke first. He talked about how I'd always been cold to him, how I'd refused to help my own family in their time of crisis, how I'd thrown a 6-year-old child out of my home. He cried, actually cried. His voice shook when he talked about Brandon asking why his aunt didn't love him. I listened to every word, and I felt my anger metastasize into something darker. Because none of it was technically a lie. I had refused to help. I had thrown them out. I did seem cold to him. But he was leaving out the part where he'd violated my explicit boundary and invaded my space without permission. When it was my turn, Patricia had me explain the timeline. She walked me through the February texts, the way I'd explicitly said no, the way Michael had ignored that and moved in anyway. She asked me how I felt when I came home and found them in my apartment. Violated, I said, and my voice cracked because it was true. I felt violated. My apartment was supposed to be my safe space, and he'd invaded it without permission. He'd put his family in my bed. He'd used my things. And when I asked him to leave, he made me feel like I was a monster for having boundaries. Judge Hayes asked me a few questions, and then she dismissed us to wait for her ruling. We waited in the hallway for 40 minutes. When we went back in, Judge Hayes looked tired. "I'm denying Mr. Chen's request for a restraining order," she said. "Based on the documentation provided, there is no evidence that Ms. Chen engaged in harassment or abuse. She explicitly denied his request to stay in her home and asked him to leave when he violated that boundary. That is her right as the property owner. However," the judge looked at both of us, "I would strongly recommend that both parties seek family mediation. This is a family matter, and it might be better resolved outside of the legal system." Michael stood up immediately and walked out of the courtroom without looking at me. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 months later, my mom called me. She was back in Portland, and she wanted to meet for lunch. I said okay, and we met at a cafe near my office called the Daily Catch, the same place I'd suggested for dinner with Michael back in February. My mom looked older than she had 3 months earlier. She had new lines around her eyes, and her hair had more gray in it. "How are you?" she asked after we'd ordered. "I'm fine. How are you?" "I'm not fine," she said. "Michael won't talk to me. Your father is furious with you. And I don't know what to do with any of this." "What do you want me to say, Mom? I set a boundary, Michael violated it, and now everyone's mad at me." "That's not what happened," she said quietly. "What happened is that your brother needed help and you said no. And I understand that he shouldn't have moved in without asking, but you also could have handled it differently. You could have been kinder." "I wasn't unkind. I was firm." "You threw a 6-year-old out of your home, Ashley." "I didn't throw anyone out. I asked them to leave, and they did." My mom set down her fork. "Do you know where they're living now?" I didn't answer. "They're still in that motel in Gresham. Michael is working as a bartender to pay for it. Jennifer got a job at Target. Brandon goes to school there. They've been living out of suitcases for 3 months, and you won't even talk to him." Something in my chest twisted. That's not my responsibility. He's your brother. He's my brother who violated my home and my trust. My mom was quiet for a long moment. "You know what the worst part is?" she said finally. "Michael loves you. He always has. He looked up to you your entire life. And now he thinks you don't love him." I felt tears prick my eyes, and I blinked them away angrily. "That's not fair. Life isn't fair," my mom said. "I'm just telling you what I see." She left after lunch, and I went back to my office and stared at my computer screen for 3 hours without accomplishing anything. My boss, Derek, asked if I was okay. I said I was fine. I wasn't fine. That night, I called Patricia. "I want to reach out to my brother," I said, "but I don't know how to do it without opening myself up to more legal problems." "You could send him a letter," Patricia suggested. "A personal letter, not through me. Just tell him what you want to tell him. It won't violate the restraining order denial, and it gives you a chance to start healing." I spent 4 hours writing and rewriting a letter to Michael. In the end, I settled on something simple. "Michael, I owe you an apology, not for asking you to leave, but for how I handled the situation afterward. I was hurt and angry, and I let those emotions drive my decisions. I should have found a way to help you, even if I couldn't let you stay in my apartment. I should have been kinder. I want to know how you're doing. I want to know how Jennifer and Brandon are. I want my brother back. Call me when you're ready. Ashley." I sent it via certified mail. 3 days later, Michael called. "Hi," he said, and his voice sounded small and uncertain. "Hi," I said back. "Thank you for calling. I got your letter. I read it about 100 times. I meant every word." There was a long pause. "I'm sorry too," Michael said. "I shouldn't have moved in without asking. That was wrong. I was desperate and scared, and I used that as an excuse to violate your boundaries. You were right to be angry. I was angry, I agreed, but I could have handled it better. I was so focused on protecting my space that I forgot to protect you as my brother. We talked for an hour that night. Michael told me about the motel room, about working doubles at the bar to pay for it, about watching Brandon fall asleep in a bed that smelled like industrial cleaning supplies. He told me about Jennifer, about how much he loved her, about how he'd messed everything up by being reckless. I have an idea, I said finally. What if Jennifer and Brandon stay with me for a few weeks, and you stay elsewhere? Just until you find something more permanent. I can't have you living there. I need my space to feel like mine, but I can help. Michael was quiet. Then he said, I don't want to take advantage of you again. You're not. I'm offering. That's different. Why would you do that after everything? Because you're my brother, I said, and because you were right about one thing. I was being selfish. I was so focused on my perfect life that I forgot that family sometimes means being inconvenienced. Jennifer and Brandon moved in 2 weeks later. I set up clear boundaries. They had the second bedroom, they could use the kitchen, they had their own bathroom. Michael came by twice a week to spend time with Brandon. After 6 weeks, Jennifer found a job with better hours and a small apartment in Northeast Portland. They moved out on a Saturday in August, and Brandon gave me a drawing he'd made of our building. It's still on my refrigerator. Michael and I don't talk about what happened very often, but we're back to being close. He's still working, and Jennifer got promoted at her new job. Brandon is doing well in school. And I've learned something that no apartment or savings account could have taught me. That being right isn't always the same as being good. My apartment is still perfect. My life is still organized and intentional. But it's also a little bit less lonely, and a little bit more human.